It'll take a couple seconds. Okay, we are live on YouTube, and then I will send us to be broadcasted now.
Attention citizens of Zoom, welcome once again to the Be Strong Families webinar series, staying strong and positive for ourselves and our children. We're so grateful to have you here today once more again. As you filter into the room, please, we'll take a look. I see folks are jumping in now. Participant numbers are rising. It's 11:59. We'll get started about 12. So as you're joining, we'd love to hear where you're joining us from. So feel free to post that in the chat, all you regulars or non-regulars, or as Spinal Tap said, we were the regulars. Then we decided to change our name to the new regulars, and they changed their name back to the something. So we could have gone back to the regulars, but we figured what was the point. Hello, Michelle from Western New York. Welcome. Welcome. Oh, Tammy, nice to see you again. Hello from Pennsylvania. Chicago. D, hey, I know you. D-Yin is here. Welcome, welcome. And Central Massachusetts, Julianne. So great to see you. Oh, it's 12 o'clock. So let's cut to the chase. Let's get things started here. If you can move to the next slide. And let's introduce our topic today. We're excited to welcome back Danielle Asher as we explore the topic, exploring the relationship between educators and families. We're so grateful to have you back here for a fourth time, right? I'll be helping guide this webinar today, but only a little bit. I'm pretty hands off. Let's move on to the next slide to review how we engage. So everyone here knows it, and then I know the agrees start popping in the chat. But if you aren't talking, please put your phone on mute. If there is an opportunity to raise your hand, we can to comment. You can raise your hand. We'll unmute you, and then you'll need to just make sure you unmute yourself on your end, and we'll be raising their hand. But really, the most effective way to engage throughout the webinar is comments in the chat, and just make sure you click on that little drop down that selects all panelists and attendees, and that way everybody can see your comments. So let's move on and get to our agreements for all of our discussions. We want to always speak from our own golden rule, treating other people the way you'd want to be treated. Every comment, every voice, every contribution is valid and desired and wanted. We love the collaboration. We love the co-creation and connection, but let's treat everyone with respect. That goes without saying, and full presence. So you've given yourself this hour, you've blocked the time, you're on this webinar. We're so grateful to have you. Give yourself that time. Don't feel the need to multitask and worry about what's coming up next. It is Friday, so we've got the whole weekend to look forward to. So we hope you in the chat to agree. If you also agree and you're on this webinar, please post in there that you agree. Welcome, Destiny. Thank you, Maria, Maribel. And as folks are agreeing, let me pass the baton over to Danielle, our presenter, to take it away. Danielle, glad to have you again.
Great. Thank you, Guy. And thank you, Dee, doing the tech behind the scenes. So again, I'm Danielle Asher, and we are going to explore the relationship between educators and families today. Next slide, Dee. So as Guy mentioned, this is my fourth time here with Be Strong Families. I'm so grateful to be. All of you have been here before or not, but doesn't matter because they all kind of stand independently. Family engagement and the difference between engagement and involvement, that too. But what does it mean to be engaged, and what does it mean to become a leader? And what kept coming up in a lot of the conversation was what happens from the side of the school. You know, what environment does the school, what's the culture of the school, of whether or not there really can be family engagement. So last time we were talking about pushing from the outside in, and parents and families that were organizing in the community and wanted to push into a school district. And I shared some examples of things that that happened with groups I worked with, and how they got policy passed, how they made changes in the school district when they organized on the outside. Today, I'm going to talk about more from the perspective of the inside. And I'm going to ask a lot of questions, some of which I'm actually asking for you to answer, as you'll see, and you'll know when I tell you, and others that are really just assessment questions. We're going to talk a lot about how we assess ourselves as teachers, as educators, and then also from the perspective of as parents, you know, things that we should be aware of and ready for true family engagement. What's the difference between checking a box and truly engaging parents? We all know what that feels like if we've been in that situation, but talk about what it means to have that family engagement from that school per slide. So I'm not going to read through all this, but just to introduce myself to you. So again, Danielle Asher is my name. I started recently Dasher Communities, which is my consulting business. I've been doing a lot of patient and teaching others to advocate as well, whether that's early childhood policies, or whether that is, you know, any other issue that you might be advocating for your child around, or advocating for public school equity funding, or different types of issues. But I've been training parents and community for many, many years on how to work with schools, as well as working with schools, with teachers and educators in different ways, doing programs in their school where I bridge the gap between the educators and the parents, or sometimes just training teachers. Maybe it's on race, equity, diversity, inclusion. Maybe it's just in general, the center of everything that we do. And so I've kind of built my life around wanting to, with my firm, is to help your organization grow with heart and mastery. It's what's going to take you to another level. And we can always have our goals, and whether that's a school, you know, environment for their staff, that's what my goals are to help, and family engagement. All right, so let's get into it. So those of you that are watching on Zoom and have that, you know, partnership is a goal, but sometimes maybe, you know, they can be part of the plan, their plan for their child, you know, educationally, socially. Reciprocal communication and transparency. Yes, transparency is really, really important. Be on the same page as a parent and as an educator. Yeah, it's really important that we find a way to come up with a plan together, right? A teacher and an educator brings a certain level of expertise because of their training, and a parent is their child's best teacher and biggest advocate, right? And we take for granted a lot of times what the parent brings to, and when I say parent, I kind of interchange family and parent, because I like to acknowledge always that it's not always just a biological parent. It could be an adoptive parent, a foster parent, it could be an aunt, an uncle, a grandmother, or in her family. But so a lot of times that person, it's taken for granted of what they know or what they can bring to the table because the professional knows, right? But that person knows their child better than anybody else. So how do we get on the same page? Next question, please. Next slide, please. So my next question for you is, what do you feel a school needs to do in order to prepare for the best form of family engagement? So we've heard a lot, obviously, setting up communication, lines of communication. Does anything else come into your mind, and ideas of what's needed? What would make a school, ready for adequate family engagement?
I always think a little bit about just feeling welcome.
Yeah.
In the building, like whether there's a room or a place that you can go where you're not standing around feeling out of place. That's how I sometimes have felt, you know, when you're in the school and all the activities happening, but you're not really in it. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that from Maria too, friendly and inviting atmosphere.
Absolutely. I know I'm going to, throughout the webinar today, I'm going to use examples of different schools that I've worked with. And I remember this one particular school talking a lot about even the security guards, and how like, if 50 or 800 didn't matter, you should be greeting everybody with the same level of welcome, and making people not feel like they're walking into something where you're like not even there. Right.
Yeah.
Bring parents to the planning before they are made. Yeah, right. Having parents be able to speak ahead of time. Is that what you mean by that? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Tracy, for clarifying. All right, so let's keep moving, and feel free to keep those comments coming if you have questions or comments throughout. Guy and I both will keep our eye on that chat. All right, so as I mentioned, I wanted to do an assessment, right? This is where I always start with, especially with educators, but with anybody, honestly, any type of training I do, I always start with the self-assessment, is looking within, right? And then also I want to talk about, again, what the school district needs for assessment. And I just want to acknowledge Sandra just put respect ethnicity. Absolutely. When Guy mentioned the welcoming aspect of it, I thought about that, race and culture and ethnicity, and how that should actually play a part, and knowing that representation and people feeling welcomed, some of those things are really going to matter. So let's get into the self-assessment. The next slide, please. So, all right, so you're going to notice I ask a lot of questions today, and they're not necessarily that you need to be typing answers in the chat about them. They're more reflection questions. But some of the things that I always ask people to think about is, first and foremost, how do we really feel about parents, right? We have a lot of judgments and assumptions that we carry, and based on our own experiences and our own knowledge, and we project a lot, right? So let me actually just read these through, and then I'll talk about it a little bit. So how do we really feel about parents, and does it seem like a bother to get their feedback, right? I know, how does it feel as a teacher, as an educator? How does it feel as another parent to have to get feedback from another parent as well, right? Like, this is also about how, as parents and family members, we work together so that we can work together to help the school move into a more productive best practice of family engagement. Are we judging based on our differences? So our cultural or educational or socioeconomic status, gender, race, sexuality, religion. I'm sure there's other different types of things that, our identity, but we see through our own lens. And therefore, sometimes we think that we're right, or this is how it is. And we forget that there are other cultures and other genders, and ableism is another one that I left out. Are we judging based on stereotypes and assumptions? Are we judging based on our own experience as a parent, right? So if we are a parent, sometimes we think we know best because we know what worked for us, but maybe, and that could be as an educator as well, right? Like putting those education professional skills and your experience as a parent, mix those together, and you must know better than anybody, right? Except that you're still not the parent raising that other child and what that child may need. Are we judging from the perspective of not being a parent, right? Sometimes, look, I've been doing family engagement work for a long time, and I don't have my own children. I'm a proud auntie to many, many babies. But other people, sometimes we judge people for not having children, and maybe they don't understand, or maybe their children are older and they've aged out of the school, but they're on the school board and involved or something, right? And are we judging based on trends we anticipate? I brought that one up a lot because I feel like a lot of times what we've learned in our textbooks, what we've learned in discussions, or just stereotypes that have followed us. But one of my least favorite is, oh, well, Jenny's mom, she doesn't come because, well, she must work 2 jobs. She's so busy, so she never comes up to the school. Maybe Jenny's mom didn't have a good experience herself with education and didn't want to come up to the school. Maybe she's not working 2 jobs. Maybe she's got a very well-balanced professional life and she's okay. Like, we make a lot of assumptions, and that is a lot of times based on race or culture or gender or just what we think, right? There's like always these lines that we like fall to. I guess they're stereotypes, but sometimes because they're known as like trends or like commonalities, we treat them as their fact. And maybe we never asked Jenny's mom, Mrs. Smith, we never asked her exactly what would make her feel more welcomed in the school. Did we have that conversation? Was there communication? But we followed what we thought was a trend, or maybe she does work 2 jobs and we are still, that doesn't mean she doesn't want to make the time to come. We just weren't being flexible with when we had something for parents to come. Maybe it was during the time that she's working. Maybe it was during the day while she was at work, but we seem to put this quick judgment on things and think that we know. Next slide. So I went into this because, again, it starts with self-evaluation. One of the things I always do when I work with teachers is ask them, why do you want to, how do you really feel about parents? Why are we here talking about family engagement? Is it because we were given a grant, like because you're checking a box? Or do you really truly believe that parents need to be involved, right? They're invested in their children and they deserve to have a voice in their child's educational plan. And I think a lot of times we have these unconscious bias, right? And we can do a training, and I do trainings all on this topic, right? Those, unconscious or implicit bias is an instinctive reaction to a person or situation that comes from learned stereotypes. These social prejudices can be based on race, gender, and social taboos. Because we're not always aware of them, it can be a challenge to find ways to address them. And it's why empathy and being more open to communication, and on the other end of communication, listening, like not just speaking all the time, but listening to other people's experiences and believing them, is so crucial. Because we do all have, every one of us has unconscious bias. And I think when it comes to parents and families, there's a lot of stereotypes and a lot of things that we assumed. And the same can go for, family and community judging teachers and stereotypes that come with teachers. I always, I'm very sensitive to both of these things, but I do feel a lot of times the educator is on the side of kind of being in a position of power. But we do need to find that mutual respect, and all of us need to check ourselves that we're working on our bias. And it's hard because it's unconscious. That's why, it's not always easy to know. But that's why I raise some of these questions, to start thinking about what is driving our view of someone or our reaction to someone.
Yeah, and Maria put in the chat, I definitely need to stop assuming and start asking questions. And Sandra agrees with that too.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. I was just going to turn to that too. And I think, it's hard. We, especially when it comes to our children or our profession, whichever side you're coming from, it's like you want to be confident in what you know. And it's hard to stop and be like, wait a second, maybe I really didn't know about, maybe I really do need to ask more questions, right? It's kind of humbling. But I raise these questions to help us maybe work on that, because all of us can continuously learn. And a lot of times, if we assume that a teacher is coming from the best, that they want the best for our child, as much as we will assume every parent is coming from that place that they want what's best for their child. How do we meet in the middle, if that's the case, of what's best for the child, right? And make sure we are trying to not come from that place of our own baggage. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the next slide, I've had the very fortunate experience to work with Dr. Karen Mapp from Harvard, who created the dual capacity framework. And she was one of the co-authors, as well as Ann Henderson and a few other professionals in the family engagement field that wrote Beyond the Bake Sale. It's a wonderful book where I've used a lot of their research and material as the foundation of my practice. And this was from their book. And it's the fact that, just to name some of the things we were just talking about, the factors that can impact successful family engagement. And I like to go through this slide with educators, thinking about our attitudes. We don't always, again, this always comes down to assumptions. Why someone may have a good or bad attitude, right? And it doesn't matter. If we keep our eye on the prize that we want to create the best education for children, then we figure out how to work with people. If it means having more empathy, if it means having more patience and compassion, and as well as like looking at our own attitude. Sometimes when we know what we know, we might come off a little bit sharp, so paying attention to how we speak to each other, how we carry ourselves, making sure we're approachable, not being put off if someone might seem a little more unapproachable, still figuring out a way that you will reach out to them and talk to them, especially on the end of a teacher to a parent. Education, right? We have a lot of bias when it comes to education. If you didn't go to college, then I might if you never got a high school degree, I think that, you're not as smart as me because I did, or maybe even what school did you go to? Meanwhile, we all know people that never graduated high school that could be the smartest person that we know, and people that have master's degrees that you're like, huh? Right? Like, or vice versa. Everyone's different. And some people just didn't have access to education, and some did, and some poor education and some good education. But we carry all of this assumption and stereotype based on what value we place on education. And therefore, it creates sometimes a divide between you and the other person. And again, as a teacher, you have gone to school, you have been trained and prepared. Just because a parent may or may not have, and make sure you're not making that assumption, but that doesn't mean that they don't know, right? But we place that judgment on what it means to have gone to school and had the privilege of having access to education. Culture. That again, we get a whole workshop just on culture and race and ethnicity and even gender, or religion, these different things that, people come with different backgrounds. One big thing with culture I like to talk about with teachers is things like eye contact or shaking hands, right? In different cultures, eye contact is actually a disrespectful thing. But I've had so many teachers be like, oh, but Stephen wouldn't look at me, and I was trying to tell him, and that was so disrespectful. But Stephen was taught at home that you don't look adults in the eye, right? And do you know that? Whether that's a culture based on ethnicity or race, or maybe it was a culture based on his family culture, right? Just as what goes on in his family. But we don't always know those things. So we have to be careful. Again, it's all about assumption, and how we speak to each other and what's appropriate and what really is someone being respectful or disrespectful may just be a shift in lens based on our own experience. Baggage. I associate baggage. It doesn't have to be trauma, but I associate it with trauma, right? One example I like to give of this is if a parent comes in, we assume a parent should do what we expect them to do as an educator. And the reality is maybe that parent had a really bad experience in school themselves. Maybe they really didn't get along with teachers, or maybe something happened to them that was discriminatory, or they felt whatever it was, right? And they carry that baggage with them, and it makes it harder for them to know how to be there for their child in the way you need them to be. One solution to this is making sure expectations are clear, making sure as a teacher or as an educator, we are letting the parents know what we need from them, and not just making assumptions that they know, right? But we all carry our own baggage, and that sometimes projects how we treat other people. Again, whether you're on either side, I just keep giving kind of quick examples, but that could really mean so many different things. And then poverty, and I think they claim poverty specifically because of the equity issue, but really socioeconomic, right? And how we judge and look at each other, and what stereotypes and assumptions we make based on someone's socioeconomic status. Let's go to the next slide, please. So if you have any comments or questions about that self-assessment, feel free to put them in there. I appreciate that some of you did as we were going. Now we're going to move into looking at the school district. And, I feel like these Be Strong Families webinars we've had, and the other ones that I've facilitated, we've had a lot of conversation about, my school just isn't there, right? Like my school just doesn't, they don't know what to do. We have a PTA, this happens and that happens, but there's just a lot of breakdown when it comes to true family engagement. So I wanted to talk about what it looked like. What are ways that we can start moving towards a more successful engagement? So let's assess, I'm going to present a bunch of questions that we look at when we look at the school. So let's go to the next slide. So starting with, does the school have a reputation? Does the school have a reputation for being open to families, and in what ways are they welcoming? So the reason I say this question as the first one is know what you're working with, right? That's what this is all about. So then this goes for whether, again, you're an educator or a parent. So if you're a parent that wants to work on this and figure out how to make your school more family friendly and more able to engage families, just be it doesn't mean, if the answer is like, no, they have no reputation, no, they're horrible, it doesn't mean they never can. But it's important to take this inventory and know what you're working with, right? And if you're a teacher that really wants to change the same thing, right? We know that if we can't count on, if we know that the decision makers in the school district, whether it's school board members or administrators, are not into family engagement at all, we know we have to start, we might have to take a different approach, right? So that's why these things are so important. So it's kind of like asking, I guess, like, what's the culture of the district when it comes to working with families? What kind of things are in place that foster two-way communication and dialogue? So you all talked about that with communication. And so obviously two-way communication is key. A lot of schools don't know how to have that reciprocal back and forth. They'll use a one-way. Are you seeing the same parents attend events and meetings regularly? Is it always, I wrote the same question twice. Is it always the same parents? I bring that up because I've had a lot of teachers be like, oh, it's always the same ones that show up. And instead of being like, what are we doing that is the thing that's not reaching the other parents? It's, see, they just don't come. Well, I haven't exhausted all those options yet, right? I'm not sure how your communication's going, and I don't know if there's language access. I don't know if like you're just doing a robocall or a flyer in the backpack that may or may not make it home. Maybe the kid took it out of their backpack to throw out their piece of gum in. Like, we have no idea, right? And so maybe the teacher forgot to hand that out. But we often think like, no, it's not me. Just it's always the same people. Well, I know as a community organizer, the way I got past always having the same people is having to do more outreach, right? And making sure I find ways to communicate with people. So there's different things. That's why I ask these questions, because these are the things I'm hearing from educators a lot.
I always think of too, like because I've heard that in the past, in strengthening families work, like, so what about those parents that are, so you have some parents there, that's a place to build, you know?
Exactly. And using those parents to find more parents, like there's a lot of different ways, but a lot of times we don't evaluate all of that. Tracy says most parent meetings are held at the time best for the staff, not parents. Yes, Tracy, I've heard that a lot. Or a certain group of parents, right? Like that is definitely something I've heard feedback from both teachers and parents. Okay, and then this last point, do you offer an opportunity for families to give feedback and see their suggestions come to fruition? So yeah, it's not just the two-way dialogue, but then also, how many meetings you're invited to the table and then nothing comes of it, right? Or like, yeah, we had a forum and we listened to you, but then you never saw any. Now, again, we're not going to see every single thing we suggest actually happen, right? That's not realistic. But we also know that if we're being invited, we want to make sure it's not just to check someone's box. I could easily say, oh, I worked with parents because parents and I had a conversation, but we want to know that our feedback and our ideas and things that we're suggesting are actually being moved into action. Next slide, please. Just a few more questions. Okay, so also I always think about board meetings. How many parents or how many people are coming, and do they feel welcomed? Are they being heard? More of what I just said. What happens to the suggestions that are being shared? What about the PTA? Again, I think kind of to Tracy's point, I hear this a lot about PTA. I know school districts that have PTA meetings at 10 o'clock in the morning. That's great for parents that stay home, but that doesn't work for everyone, right? And are they diverse? Again, are you intentionally making sure that you're reaching out to more? And when I say diverse, I mean, sometimes it's just like one group of parents, are already friends with each other, right? Like, or is it diverse, so it could be racially, it could be socioeconomically, it could be whatever, but in different neighborhoods. Are we really making an effort to get parents from different places? Again, what kind of outreach is being done? Sorry, I know some of these are a little repetitive, but I guess they're important to hear more than once anyway. How are people being reached? Home visiting practices. Right now, I know, we're in the time of COVID, so maybe home visiting is a little bit different than it was before for those of you that have experienced it. But I'm sure Zoom meetings and one-on-ones, if people are not comfortable going to homes, there's lots of different ways. And then I raised the question of before and after care for families. So how do we think about families and from a holistic perspective and making sure that we are providing an opportunity for families to have everything that meets their needs? We'll talk a little bit more about that. I see Maria wrote here, if I've learned anything from the pandemic, I have learned this, that I need to intentionally be flexible and creative in reaching families. Yes, Maria, absolutely. That's wonderful that you've learned that lesson. Some positive things have certainly come out of this pandemic and forcing us to grow. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted you to participate with me on this one. So going back to the Beyond the Bake Sale book again, Karen Mapp and her colleagues created these core beliefs of family engagement. And this kind of goes in line with the self-assessment, but I just wanted to go through them real quickly because, again, this is usually where I learn a lot about how educators feel about families. So what I want you to do, for those of you on the Zoom, is put a 1 if you believe in the statement, put a 2 if you're not sure, or if you're kind of like in the middle, and put a 3 if you're like, absolutely not. So let's go to the next slide. So the first core belief that we will see says all parents have dreams for their children and want the best for them. So do you put a 1 in the chat if you believe, 2 if you're in the middle there, or 3 if you're like, no, they don't. No way, parents don't have dreams for their children. Great. So I see lots of 1s popping up. Let's go to the next slide. That one's pretty easy, right? Like you would think that's something that really all of us have in common. We want to see the best for our child and have dreams for them. Number 2, all parents have the capacity to support their children's learning. So 1 if you believe, 2 if you're in the middle, 3 if you say no. Okay, so we have a 3 in there. We have a 2. This one always starts to challenge people a little bit more. Lots of 2s, lots of unsures or maybes, right? So all parents have the capacity to support their children's learning. So the answer really is that they do have the capacity. And it's something we need to start believing. Now, that doesn't mean we have a ton of time, and that doesn't mean we're not raising more than one child or dealing with our work situation or dealing with whatever else in life. But we have the capacity to figure out what we need, right? Like, so I might not be good at math, and you would never, ever, ever want me helping you with your math homework. But I have the capacity to ask someone else to help my child, to get that child extra help, to get the service that is needed. Maybe whatever it may be, maybe it's even something on YouTube, maybe whatever it may be. There's so many different options, right? That's, again, just one quick little example. But we actually do have the capacity. We do, and again, because we want what's best for our children, because we dream these things for our children, we want to think about how we build that capacity. And maybe it can't always be us, but there are other ways to provide that support. Next slide, please. Number 3. So parents and school staff should be equal partners. Do we believe this? 1, 2, not sure. 3, absolutely not. Okay, got some 2s, 1, mostly 1s. Yeah, I mean, again, this is really the goal, is that we are equal partners, that we are figuring out how to come together, create that plan for the child so that they will have the most successful experience possible. And so ideally, that partnership is what we need. And let's go to the last one, number 4, next slide. The responsibility for building and sustaining partnerships between school, home, and community rests primarily with school staff, especially school leaders. 1, I believe it. 2, not sure. 3, absolutely not. I got a 3. If you're feeling challenged by this question in any way, no, it challenges everyone, everyone that gets asked the question. So we got a few 3s and a 2. And for those of you that are putting in 3s and 2s, does anyone want to share why you don't believe in this? So we got all 3s and 2s on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I put a 3 just because I do think, and maybe it's a way of thinking about how we define primarily, but I think that we should be, there's got to be an equal desire to a degree, to want to put in the partnership effort, as well as if we expect the teachers to do the engagement, then we need to also feel ready to be engaged and want to be engaged. So I think it's a shared partnership.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Guy. I have here also, I believe parents are a child's first teacher. Absolutely, Tracy. Because as a parent, I've had to take initiative many times in contacting teachers and other staff. And Maria said, because the school cannot do everything, they cannot be all things to everyone. They can try to lead, but I don't believe they should assume sole responsibility. Sure. I just want to read the statement again. The responsibility for building and sustaining partnerships between school, home, and community rests primarily with school staff, especially school leaders. So I think, and I didn't write the book, so I can't tell you exactly, and Stephanie said she agrees. I think that the idea of this is, the school is a structure that is there. First of all, the child is spending more time at school than anywhere else, right? Doesn't take away the fact that the parent is the primary the first teacher, the primary advocate, all the things that parents become. But the school is in a position to make sure they are connected with the community, to make sure that they are inviting in parents so that we can build that partnership, right? Like, as a parent, should you have to chase a teacher around so that you can get an answer about your child? And I'm not even saying yes or no, but and we know that teachers have so much on their plate, and they're doing so many more teachers than not go above and beyond for their students. And that is absolutely something I believe. But the culture of the school and how we set up that partnership and that foundation is the part that I think this is meant to challenge. And what is the school offering? I'm going to actually keep going, because I think not in the direct next slide, but in the next section, we're going to actually, I think it'll shed some light on this number 4. But just know that those of you that were feeling like, no, that is not uncommon. That is the most common reaction. Let's just see the comments. Sandra said, school and home are different institutions and are part of our society. Yes. Maria, I do believe school leaders need to prioritize building and sustaining partnerships between school, home, and community. Thanks, Maria. All right, you can go to the next slide, Dee. That was okay. So this was just something, I sit on this board, and I was on a board meeting the other day, and they were talking about risk management, and it made me think about, maybe this is a little silly, but it made me think about this webinar and looking at family engagement from like a risk perspective, right? Like what is the risk if we don't I truly believe, and if you saw, I think the very first webinar I did for Be Strong Families, I believe that family engagement is the key to school reform, right? To changing how we do school, is really truly creating partnerships with family and community. And so, and I started thinking about the risks, right? Just again, more questions to raise for yourselves and for a school to ask. But what are the risks when the establishment checks boxes and makes it look like meaningful work is being done? There's so many situations where there are grants to work with different communities, different populations, and in this case, maybe school to work with parents, and they just want to check a box. And how is that really accomplishing anything, right? What are the risks of demonstrating non-inclusive practices, knowing that you're only working with a small portion of the parents or the community? What are the risks of not including parent voice in decisions that are best for their child? Again, if you've already gone through this whole assessment and you're breaking down walls of those barriers with biases, then think about it from this perspective. We know that when families are engaged, and the Strengthening Families framework and a lot of other frameworks that are out there and early childhood research and different things all say, I mean, years and years and years of research show that the more involved the family is, the more involved in a partnership with the school the family is, the child is going to have a more successful, happier experience. So that's why I guess I was thinking of these risk factors. What is the risk if there's a lack of transparency? You know, what do we ever think about it from the frame of what are we losing when we're not engaging parents? I think a lot of times it's easier not to, but we're losing so much when we don't. What are the risks when only certain parents get to weigh in on decision making? So I just it was like a kind of, to me, a new frame to think of it from, and really, really considering, instead of what do we need to get done, but what are the things that happen when we don't? The risks are the outcomes we are currently experiencing, especially in poor to lower income communities. Large numbers of high school dropouts, increasing biases. Exactly, Maria. We are seeing so much of that. So many students, especially since the pandemic and that are home learning, that, you know, there wasn't good communication with parents. And we're seeing so many kids fall through the cracks and their grades dropping, and they're suffering from even, you know, social, emotional effects, you know, depression and different things that have been happening because it has just been such a difficult time. And these are the risks. We are literally can be losing children at large numbers. And we don't get those years back, right? So let's go to the next slide. So some of the ways I think we begin making changes, and these are just kind of broad statements. We'll get into some more specifics, but just, you know, creating a shared understanding of what community and family engagement really is. I should put a big star next to develop trusting relationships, because that to me is the biggest thing of how we move forward, is creating that trust with each other. Building plans together, as many of you mentioned in the comments, and evaluate and adjust accordingly. So let's move on because we're running out of time. Move on to the next slide. Actually, you can keep going to the next one. So we're gonna there's just 5 things I wanted to point out that a school can start shifting their frame, right? So a school could be a resource center, right? Do we think about, there's a lot to think about. I don't want anyone to think I'm saying this like it's just so easy, but it is about choices and priorities, right? So one of the things I have found, so I've worked in nonprofit for a very long time, and I've worked with schools, but I've always worked with schools from the perspective of from a nonprofit that's partnered with a school district. So one of the things in my former nonprofit that I worked with before the pandemic, Choice for All, we were working with one of our school districts. We have 124 school districts on Long Island, by the way. But we were working with one in particular, and this issue of being a resource became a major focus. And I think reminding, and a lot of educators are very well aware of this, but just making sure it's always part of the conversation, right? Is that when a family doesn't have heat or shelter or food, or their health needs aren't being met, it makes it really hard to be present in school, or to be doing well in school, or for a parent to come to the school, right? There's so many different things that we're balancing. And there's meal programs and before and after care and other parent advocates, or a parent drop-in center, or parent mentors. So for example, so Choice for All has a program called HEAP that helps people get heat and heat in the wintertime. And so having partnerships, if the school can't handle it themselves, United Way, which I know a lot of places have United Ways, they are often funding programs like this, right? So schools finding partnerships to make sure that parents have those very special needs. Again, on Long Island, there's an organization called Island Harvest that works with the school districts to make sure that families have meals to take home, because a lot of children get 1 or maybe 2 meals at school, right? So being a resource, really starting to change the mindset to a holistic mindset, that we're helping families meet their needs, so that in school we can focus on the education. Let's go to the next slide. And there's so many more examples, but I'm just kind of going quickly since we're running out of time. Looking at real budget decisions, right? So understand what funds are being allocated specifically for family engagement and relationship building. The budget reflects a commitment. Does does the budget reflect a commitment to family engagement? So, there are things in the budget that should be allocated towards families, right? Like there are certain grants, like from the federal government. There was My Brother's Keeper grant, or how schools choose to use their Title I funding. Or sometimes, again, it goes back to partnerships and who are you partnering with? I know, in New York State, the Office of Children and Family Services, oftentimes organizations get funding from them and they can allocate a line for family engagement where they partner with a school district to provide some kind of service for parents or a leadership program for parents or some kind of connection. I know foundations, they have actually closed their doors, but the Hagedorn Foundation on Long Island was a wonderful partner, bringing nonprofits together where the grant may have gone to the nonprofit, but again, then partnered with the school district to have programs to enhance family engagement. And so there are ways to do this, and there's lots of things to learn about your school budget to see how those budget decisions are being made and making sure things are being allocated, and prioritized to have family engagement in that budget. And a lot of our state and federal funding these days is including family engagement lines and making sure families are to be engaged. So understanding, especially as a parent, but also as a teacher that is interested in creating this family engagement and wanting to have those conversations with the decision makers, understand how it's being used currently, and that being part of the conversation on how to shift those funds for the future. Because everyone has the right to have a say in that budget, right? That's what the board meetings are for. They usually have budget meetings. And so these are things that we need to be aware of. Let's go to the next slide. And these are all concrete things that schools can do to start showing that there is more of an investment in families. So we've talked a lot about this, including families in the decision making. So one of the parents I work very closely with, her name is Sarah. She, on her school district, they created a committee, like a hiring committee. And Sarah gets to sit in on interviews. Not sure if it's the second interview or I'm thinking it's the second of 3 interviews. I'm not totally sure. But she and other parents get to be part of a committee that interviews candidates for teaching positions and other positions at the, at the school. Parent advocacy, what kind of programs, a lot of times parent liaisons. I've known a few schools that I've worked with that have actually had either parent drop-off center or parent advocates that work in the district. And they're there to help other parents when they come in and help them navigate what services are offered for families. School boards often have committees that parents are invited to be a part of. This also maybe for your school could be a PTA. One of the things so in 2 different school districts at my last, at Choice for All, as I mentioned before, we did something called the Family Leadership Academy. And that program, it was a 5-week family engagement program where it was teachers, educators, we had some principals, like it was anyone from the school, any educator in the school district, and parents come together and they would sit at the table together and we would take them through, like I said, 5 weeks worth of exercises and activities that help them decide what was needed for the school. So in one district, it ended up being that they created an equity and inclusion task force because they wanted to have a policy in the district that was going to help make it more inclusive to not just the students, but to parents as well. And that was their start of their process, was together, parents and educators were going to start this committee. Another school, in the other school district, there was a lot of different things. Some of it was about enhancing the PTA and being more inclusive in their outreach and having language access. There was also a lot of talk about different programs like mentoring when you were signing your children up for school, having family mentors that could be part of making sure that the new parents coming in would feel included and welcomed into the district. There was a lot of different initiatives with the other schools. And I bring this up to say, the parents were feeling empowered because when when the school decided to invest the money in having that program come into their school to bridge that gap between the educators and the parents, they felt empowered and they felt heard, and especially because they were seeing the ideas that came up in those classes come to fruition in the school district. And so there are lots of ways that schools, and there's even more simple or, you know, more everyday things like how we run our parent-teacher conferences, things like that. Let's go to the next slide, please. We're going to wrap up in a minute. And this speaks to what I was just saying too with community partnerships. You know, schools can't take on every single thing, and that's why these partnerships are so important. And this tying back to the last slide, like one organization that we worked with, they had bilingual advocates come in. So when they did their parent-teacher nights, they made sure that there was an interpreter there for the parents that needed that, and making sure that they had language access. So these partnerships can become really crucial. You know, I mean, as you've noticed, I've mentioned partnerships in almost every one of these things I've mentioned, right? Because you can't always be there to do every single thing. Teachers have so much on their plate, but it is about the commitment, and it is about how you lay the foundation. So, you know, how do you connect with childcare centers and after-school programs, community foundations, places like the YMCA or other organizations, food and meal programs? There's so many different partnerships that a school can create to make sure that you are, you know, to enhance the capacity of the school. And let's go to the last. So last but not least, and again, this has kind of been a thread throughout, but the policy, seeing policy and practice in place. I think we're stuck a little bit with the slide.
Did you want to go to the next slide? Sorry, the audio broke up.
That's what I said. So thanks, Dee. Yeah, policy and practice. So these were just some that came to my mind. Again, so in the one school district that I have talked about, they had a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force that they created, and the idea was to put a policy in place. There's communication policies. Another group of parents, this was more of a group that we started on the outside to work into the district, but they came up with a parent bill of rights that they started meeting with the school to have a parent bill of rights in the district. Now, some schools may have a parent bill of rights or a student bill of rights, but know what's in them. You know, get copies of these policies, a language access policy. Is there a policy on how parents get involved with the educational planning? If these policies exist, know them and think about if they need to be revised or things need to be added to them. Or maybe it's that they don't exist and you need to create them, which again could turn into what partnerships, looking at partnerships. I just want to turn to the comments for a second. So Tracy says, I've seen this not work too well because some parents that are really involved sometimes feel they are the leaders and are not open to other parent ideas. And admin also tend to favor those parents more. Yes, we must ensure all parents' voices heard and appreciated, even if they only come to one event. Tracy, I agree 100%, which is why in my questions earlier in the assessment, I raised exactly these points of how we assess that. It's like, you know, I'm presenting a lot of information at all of you, but it's like coming up with that plan to do the assessment and to look at how we can fix some of those issues that you're mentioning and move forward. I wanted to also give some kind of concrete things, but I agree, we need to go back to those basics and look at how we make sure we are getting parents involved in a way that feels empowering and not, you know, what's happening there. Maria wrote, what's interesting is that the federal level Head Start, federally funded early education preschool program, has been implementing many of these strategies you're sharing for over 50 years. And now is when school systems throughout the nation are more strategically and intentionally incorporating the vital information. 100% again. Maria, I agree. I'm a big fan of Head Start, big supporter of Head Start. I've worked a lot with the Head Starts in my area and working with them on training. So Head Start is an incredible model for all of us to build from. And you're right, it's over 50 years, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that. I like to give Head Start a shout out because you're right, they've been leading the work in this for a long time. So, and Tracy said, yes, yeah, absolutely. So again, I just wanted to give you some concrete things, but I think the things we talked about earlier in breaking down the foundation is the most important. And, you know, please feel free to reach out to me if anybody wants to, talk a little more about how the paper. Talk, if anyone wanted to talk further about how to approach this in your school or what the best first steps can be. In the last webinar, I talked a lot about organizing from the outside in. Again, as parents, as teachers, I always say, find other educators in your building, in your district that feel the way you do. And even if it's 2 or 3 of you, start from there. Getting the decision makers on board with this stuff is the key, but sometimes starting a group to begin this process is the first step. So you can go to the next slide. I think actually you can keep going because I think we need to skip this question for now. So again, I want to thank Be Strong Families so much for having me, and thank all of you for your participation. That my email's there and my website, I really truly mean it. Feel free to reach out to Guy or to Kathy, or just reach out to me directly if you want to talk more about how you can implement some of these things. And I appreciate so much you all participating, and hang in there, everyone.
I'm muted. Thank you, Danielle, for the presentation. And Dee, if you could put the website, her website and email in the chat for a minute, that'd be great. For those on the webinar, we have our ending poll that just popped up. So please take a moment to fill that out while I go through these last few slides. Help us understand how much you enjoyed this and a little bit about you. If you could move to the next slide, please. Here's a look at our schedule for the coming week. There it is. Still planning to have Thursday and Friday, but finalizing those titles now. But here you could take a look at our topics for Monday through Wednesday. And we hope you'll register for those, and we'll see you again next week. You can access these at our website, bestrongfamilies.org. You can go directly to the page where the registrations are by going to bestrongfamilies.org/COVID-19-support, or from our homepage, you can click on the webinar button right at the top when you pop in there. Let's move to the next slide. And let's amplify engagement. Just hope you'll share and amplify the positive on social media this week related to this topic or anything you see positive that we can kind of spread that energy online. #amplify. Hey, amplify it all, and tag Be Strong Families so we could take a look at that. And then you could email us directly at covid-19@bestrongfamilies.net with comments, strategies, information on what you've heard and seen using that email. If we can move to the next slide. If you enjoy these webinars and would like to support us, one way to do that is you could purchase your Be Strong Families mask through our website, bestrongfamilies.org/resources. There's our staff member, Andrew, modeling one of those variations right now with his wife. We have 2 options. Take a look, and if you're interested, you can place an order. We'd appreciate it. And let's see, closing things out. If you have a topic that you think would be great for this webinar series, we'd love to host it. You can email Kathy at kathe@bestrongfamilies.net and share your idea. And also, if you recommend anybody, we can check in with them. We're keeping this series going. We're coming up on our year anniversary of these webinars next week. So that's certainly a milestone. I don't know one that we expected, but it's coming up. Danielle, anything you want to share before we kind of close things out for the day?
No, just want to say thank you again to everyone participating and to Be Strong Families. It's been really wonderful being able to come back and keep talking with all of you.
Absolutely. We're so grateful to have you again. It was a great session, a great way to kick off the weekend too. So everyone have a safe, healthy weekend, stay strong, and we'll see you next week. We appreciate you greatly. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.